right. So good evening, everyone. Yes, I'm Dari Heatherman, Bob's co-coordinator for California for a World Beyond War. Thank you for all joining us tonight. We have a very special guest. We are honored to have David Hartsough with us tonight. Now, David is many things. He is co-founder of World Beyond War and a member of the advisory board of World Beyond War. He's based in California. He's a Quaker and a lifelong peace activist, and an author of his memoir, Waging Peace: Global Adventures of a Lifelong Activist. David is going to tell us about his memoir and his experience tonight, and we warmly welcome him. Thank you, David, for joining us.
Thank you, Dari, and thank you, Bob, for the introduction, the kind introduction. And it's great to meet with all of you. And I want you to know how deeply I appreciate your good work. That's going to take all of us, or thousands of us from all over the world, to achieve our goal of abolishing all war. I think people already know the figures. 200 million people died in wars in the last century, and we spend $1 trillion or so every year, strengthening, quote, improving our weapons of war and fighting wars. And while thousands and thousands of our own people are starving and homeless and without health care, and students going into debt because they can't pay their college tuition, etc. So back 12 years or so ago, I guess, it was after Howard Zinn died, and I read a whole lot of Howard Zinn stuff, and everything he wrote, he says, we must end war. We have to abolish war. And I thought, yeah, it's a little bit tiresome to keep trying to stop one war after another. We really need to stop and abolish all wars, stop wars before they start. So I wrote a little proposal that I sent out to many of my friends, including David Swanson. And David Swanson wrote back, if you're serious about this, let's get to work. So that was the beginning. And I was so grateful. I think that one of the things that is in greatest need, the reason so many people have given up, working for peace or working for justice, is they're just feeling hopeless, that it's so overwhelming. The threat of nuclear war is so horrendous, they don't even want to think about it. And so our government leaders are taking us on a path straight toward nuclear war with Russia or China. We could be in a nuclear war in, an hour. And we now know through nuclear winter, most of us would die. All over the world, over 9 billion people would die. And I would think that if people really realize that, they would say, we've got to stop this. This is madness. We cannot remain silent in the face of this. So that's actually part of our job, is to encourage people to wake up and stop it before the nuclear war starts, and before we continue any of the crazy wars we're fighting. Well, I decided to write my book called Waging Peace: Global Adventures of a Lifelong Activist, just to share some of my stories of peacemaking and justice making over the last 60 years, or 65 years, I guess. And to try to, with the hope that if people hear some of these stories, it might give them hope that even a small number of individuals or groups can make change, that we don't have to accept the madness of where we're all going. So what I'd like to do this evening is to just share some of those stories accompanied by slides, which Dari has and will put in her screen share. And after each slide, I'll just share a bit of the story that accompanies that slide, that picture, and then we can go on to the next. Do you have them, Dari? Sorry, we should have had a rehearsal. Can you open it? Or it's hard getting on your screen share?
In the meantime, David, you could tell how are you feeling? How is your health?
Well, they say I almost died in December, and here I am, alive and
Good to see you.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, Sudarshan, good to see, wonderful to see you. And my cancer for over a year, they said I might have months to live. This was 2 years ago. And I was needing blood transfusions every week to keep enough good blood in my system. And now it's been 2 months since I've had a blood transfusion. So that's tremendous progress. So I'm ready to keep going as long as I can. There's a lot of good trouble to be made. You having trouble, Dari? Well, you're muted. Dari, you're muted.
You're muted, Dari.
So forgiving you guys, okay, screen share, and it's asking for desktop or iPhone, iPad via AirPlay. I would like desktop, but then it wants me to go to system preferences. And I'm sorry, I've never been in this situation, had it be so complicated before. But let me try to play it from my iPhone via AirPlay. And then it says, allow Zoom to share your screen. Open system preferences, security and privacy to grant access. So access, let's see.
While you're
okay
that on the screen,
sure,
I'll just share one of the stories.
Please do. Thank you.
Well, I'll start even earlier. I had the chance to meet Martin Luther King when I was just 15 years old in Montgomery during the Montgomery bus boycott, and seeing that nonviolent struggle, the tens of thousands of people that were walking to work every day. And even when their churches were bombed by the whites, refused to say, we're going to hate these people, or we're going to bomb the white churches. And that's made a lifetime impact on me. I think how nonviolent struggle and sustained nonviolent struggle can really make a profound difference. Well, partly as a result of that, well, in high school, a Hiroshima maiden, one of the young women from Hiroshima that had been severely burned, her face was terribly burned, had come to this country to get medical care. She came to my high school and spoke and showed a film on Hiroshima, what had happened there. And then afterwards said, we of Hiroshima who experienced this horrendous horror want to make sure that no one else in the world ever has to suffer what we've suffered. And that made a tremendous impact on me. Instead of hatred or revenge, or we're going to get back to the people that dropped this bomb and destroyed our city and killed our families. We're going to make sure that this never, no one else has to suffer what we've suffered. So that's made a lifelong struggle for me, trying to continue what that young Japanese woman was saying. We've got to make sure this never happens to anybody again in the future. And when I was just 15, also, I helped organize a peace walk from Philadelphia to the United Nations in New York, calling on all nations to stop their nuclear bomb tests. And it's about 100 miles. And we stayed on the floors in churches and usually would talk to people in the congregations about what we're doing, and went to the United Nations. Well, partly based on the experience. Doris, is it working? Not yet.
I think it will. Bob, will you enable screen share for participants?
Well, I made you the host instead of the co-host, and I think that that's supposed to do it.
Oh,
Okay.
Let me look here.
okay, let's
So-
see. This is looking better.
So
Okay, here we go. Yeah.
Well, we got it.
Okay, good.
good.
About
Next.
that? Great,
Next.
okay. All right.
Go ahead to the next slide.
All right. Thanks for your patience. Okay.
Just go down one or to the right.
Do you see the Walk for Peace signs?
Yes.
Oh, you
Yeah.
did, yes. So that was our Walk to Peace walk, and those are some of my fellow students. Next. Well, partly influenced by my time meeting King and being in Montgomery, I decided to go to Howard University, which was a Black university, and decided to try to stop segregation by going the other direction, integrating the Black college. Well, that was so spring of 1960, when the 4 African-American students in Greensboro, North Carolina, sat down at a drugstore to get something to eat. Instead of getting something to eat, were arrested. And that was a spark that encouraged thousands of, especially African-American students all over the country, to begin sitting in drug stores and restaurants. And so in Washington, D.C., Washington was actually integrated, but Maryland and Virginia were still totally segregated. So we started by going to Maryland. Instead of giving us something to eat, they arrested us, like students in Greensboro. And we sang, that was on a Saturday morning, we would sing freedom songs all weekend. And on Monday morning, we'd go back to our classes at Howard. Well, the state of Virginia had passed a law saying anybody that sat in Virginia could get $500 fine and a 6 months in jail. And we kept going to Maryland. But after our final exams, and the head of the Nazi party, George Lincoln Rockwell, I think was his name, was threatening violence against anybody that came and tried to integrate the restaurants there. We did some additional nonviolent training and went down to Arlington, Virginia. And here we are at a drugstore, and I'm down there on the far end. And the owner decided not to arrest us. He didn't want the publicity, but he also wasn't going to give us any food or drink. So we sat there for 2 days, and people spat at us in the face. put lit cigarettes down our shirts. They kicked us in the stomach until it knocked us off the chairs onto the floor, and then kicked us. And each time this would happen, we would try to respond in a loving, nonviolent way, as was the discipline of the movement throughout the South. And toward the end of the second day, I heard a guy say, "If you don't get out of this door in 2 seconds, I'm going to stab this to your heart." And I looked, and here in his hand was a switchblade, by that time an inch from my heart. And I had to decide, do I really believe in nonviolence, or is there a better way to deal with this guy? But we'd had a lot of practice, and I just looked him in the eyes and I said, "Friend, do what you believe is right, but I'll still try to love you." And miraculously, this face contorted with hatred and this hand with the switchblade shaking fell, and he left the store. Well, for a, young, whatever I was, 19-year-old by that time, it was quite an amazing experience about the power of nonviolence. Well, we got out of that store alive that night, late that night, by some friendly media people that took us back to Washington. And then we literally, we made a statement from the front door of this drugstore where there were 500 people threatening, violence if we ever came back again. And so we went back to Howard and literally shook for 6 days. Do we have the courage to go back and do this again? And on the 6th day, we got a phone call that the religious and community leaders had met and had decided to talk with the business people, that things had to change in Arlington. And the business people had made a decision to open the restaurants and the drugstores to everyone within 10 days. So that was the most important lesson of my life. Then when something terrible is happening, instead of just hiding to be somewhere where you might be safe, to find some other people that believe as deeply as you do, get some nonviolent training, and go and challenge that injustice or that violence. So that's been my life for the last 60-some years. Next. Next. That's me, a second there. That's
Yeah.
fine. So instead of spending 6 months in jail, I decided to go to Berlin, which the United States and the Soviet Union were threatening nuclear war over Berlin that year. It was 1961. And those are Soviet tanks on the other side facing west. And these are American tanks on this side facing east. And I studied in both East and West Berlin for a year to try to understand both sides, And what I realized is people are getting a lot of propaganda in both East and West. And no wonder we can't get along. We're learning that the other side, whoever that is, or both sides felt this, the other side is the epitome of all evil. And the only thing he understands is violence and threats of violence. And that's the way to get security, which it seemed to us students, that was madness. So anyway, that was an amazing experience that opened up my eyes about this world we're living in that is keeping these wars going. We keep hearing the terrible things about the other side and of course our own virtues. So I heard that you could go camping in the Soviet Union. The next slide. So I found four other. I found four. Please mute yourself if you're not already. I found 4 other German and American students, and we took a 6,000-mile trip through Russia. And just meeting ordinary people. I had studied Russian in college, and really finding the humanity in one another. These are some of the Russians that we met, and if you look closely, you can see they're all communists. I mean, how could we live in peace with these horrible people? I'm joking, of course. Next. So I actually the next for the next 3 summers, I led groups of students, organized groups of students to go on camping trips to Russia. And of course, in the campgrounds, we had many interesting talks also. Well, the spring of '62, I had been in a small demonstration in front of the White House praying for an end to the nuclear arms race and for the end of nuclear bomb testing. And we ended up arrested and going to jail. And later that summer, I was in Moscow again, and here I am in the Kremlin, in front of the Kremlin in Red Square, and we were handing out leaflets that said "Bomb tests kill people" in Russian, and handing out leaflets. Paul and I were just the only 2 people doing it at that point. And the people said, you know, our bombs are peaceful bombs. Why don't you go back to the United States and demonstrate there? And we said, well, that's interesting. In the United States, they said their bombs were peaceful and go to Russia. And the police came and threatened us with 20 years in prison. And I said, well, thank you for warning us. But if we have a nuclear war, if we keep going the way we are, we're all going to be dead. And 20 years in prison would be better than all of us being dead. And they said, well, we have to go back and talk to our superiors. So they went to talk to their superiors and never came back. But I was banished from the Soviet Union for 26 years after that, because I had been a bad boy. Next. Well, also spring of 1962, that's me, the younger guy on the left, 6 Quakers had the opportunity to meet with President Kennedy in the Oval Office. And he was sitting in his rocking chair and we were sitting around in a circle. And it was amazing. He was listening to us. It wasn't like he was the president of the United States. And, you know, who are we common people? And among other things, we were encouraging him to take the initiative to stop our nuclear bomb testing and to challenge the Russians to a peace race. And he says, you know, I've been reading The Guns of August, where everybody, or all the nations in Europe were afraid of a war coming and thought, well, we need to arm to the teeth to make sure this doesn't happen. And he says that's exactly what did bring about the First World War. And it's scary how similar the situation is now to what it was then. But he said, if you're serious about this, you're going to have to build a much stronger movement in this country to help me take that kind of leadership. And actually, within a year, he did stop U.S. nuclear bomb tests and challenge the Russians to a peace race. And unfortunately, some of us feel, and the last year of his life, almost every decision he made was against what the national security, his military advisors were advising him to do. He had actually come around to our side totally and was willing to risk his life. And there are many people that feel his taking those strong And if you haven't seen it, look at the American University speech by President Kennedy in June of '62. He said everything that we would have wanted to say, but that was what got him killed in 1963. Next. Well, during the Vietnam War, for years and years and years, that war just dragged on, and hundreds of thousands more soldiers were sent to Vietnam and bombing the cities and the countryside. Well, some of us Quakers, this is me, right to the left of the congressman that's standing, began on Wednesdays at noon reading the names of the American war dead on the Capitol steps. And after we'd read maybe 20, 30 names, we would be arrested and taken to jail. And after 3 weeks of this happening, going to jail week after week, I went to Congressman George Brown that's standing there. He was a Southern California congressman. Some of you may remember him. And I said, Congressman, we're getting arrested just for reading the names of the war dead on the Capitol steps. Could you do anything to help us? And he sat back in a swivel chair and he says, yeah, he says, I think I will join you. And furthermore, I will write to every member of Congress, telling them what I'm doing and encouraging them to join us. So the next day was Wednesday, and we started reading the names of the war dead, and here 3 congressmen had joined us. George Brown, Ed Koch, who later became the mayor of New York, and Charles Diggs of Detroit. And so when we continued reading the names, we Quakers were all arrested, but the 3 congressmen continued reading. By that time, I think it was 35,000 names, which got publicity all over the world, all over the country. And within 2 weeks, Life magazine did a special issue of every American that had been killed, with like a long paragraph of each one in a whole issue of Life magazine. And within several weeks, people were demonstrating, reading the names of the war dead all across the country, at the congressional offices, at city halls, at congressmen's offices, etc. So I'd like to think that our courage gave courage to these Congress people to do what they believed was right, and their courage touched the hearts. And in succeeding weeks, many other Congress people also joined us. Their courage gave courage to other Congress people, and of course got the attention of the press, and that touched millions of people around the country to becoming much more active in opposing this horrendous war. Next. Well, this was whatever, a year or so later, also during the Vietnam War, and 250 Quakers decided to have a Quaker worship service in front of the White House, and a silent meeting for worship. And so here's my wife Jan and I, and our little daughter Heidi, and our son Peter, who was 3, was right behind the chief of police. Well, the police arrested all the other, all the 250 other people, but left us sitting there on the pavement. And the chief of police is coming to try to implore us to leave, that we've made our point. And do you realize that your children will be taken away from you and put in juvenile hall? And don't you realize what will happen if they're put in juvenile hall? Don't you love your children? And we said, of course we love our children, but we also love the children of Vietnam. And we've come here to pray for an end to this madness. And he ended up arresting us. We walked to the police car, and they took us over to Georgetown. Instead of putting us in jail and taking the kids to juvenile hall, he just let us out. But this picture was in papers all across this country. And somehow this young family taking the risk of praying for an end to this madness somehow got the attention of the media much more than 250 other Quakers, many of whom were quite elderly. And, you know, a lot of people, when they start having a family and have kids, they say, well, we had great idealistic ideas when we were young, but, you know, we have to put those aside. Well, we never got that idea. So the deep belief that we're all children of God and we're all brothers and sisters, and it's insane to even kill one other person, has stayed with us all of our life. Next. So in fall of 1971, the U.S. started bombing Hanoi and Haiphong right before Christmas time. And we were living in Philadelphia at that time. And I mean, we'd been bombing villages and rice paddies and throughout South and North Vietnam up to that point. But now we're starting to drop bombs on cities with millions of people at Christmas time. So we somehow decided we have to put our bodies between these bombs and the people in Hanoi and Haiphong. Well, I'm gonna have to make this short, but here we are in canoes blocking the ship called the USS Nitro, taking ammunition and bombs and all kinds of military equipment to Vietnam. Well, we were blockading it. We're putting our bodies between those bombs and the people in Hanoi and Haiphong. And as I lifted the anchor of the ship, we looked up on the bow, and here were lots of sailors cheering us on. And 7 of the sailors jumped overboard into the ocean and began swimming toward us to join our, we call it a people's blockade. Well, that of course got publicity also. And that our people's blockade spread to both coasts of this country, where for months, people continued blocking armed ships and aircraft carriers. Next. And this is an aircraft carrier in Norfolk, Virginia, that we were also blocking. And you can see these sailors were all cheering us on. And what they told us later was that when their ship left for Vietnam, during the last hour, 100 sailors went AWOL. And again, I think our courage gave them courage to do what they really deeply believed in. And if you've seen the film, Sir, No, Sir, finally the US could not fight that war anymore because the soldiers were not obeying orders. Next. Well, next, but we were also, during the apartheid movement, that was our message to a South African ship trying to unload in Oakland. And we actually were able to get the longshoremen not to unload that ship. And then they tried to unload, they went up to Portland and there were protests there and they could not unload there and they went to Seattle. and then they went back to South Africa. So names are slipping my name. The president, the new president of South Africa after apartheid, Nelson Mandela, came to Oakland afterward to thank all of us for what we'd been doing in that movement. Next. So this is this is the nuclear bomb test site where the US tested most of its nuclear weapons, or maybe all, after the nuclear test, the above ground nuclear test treaty stopped. And for year after year, hundreds of us, sometimes thousands, demonstrated there that this place has to close. And next, and some of us would spend 2 weeks in jail, but we built community. And somehow they never stopped us. Well, this, I think I'm going to stop with this slide, or this and the next one. But this is Concord Naval Weapons Station, just east of San Francisco. And it's where 80% of the bombs to Vietnam were shipped from. And also during the Second Central America Wars, bombs and munitions were going to Latin America to support the dictatorships. And at any rate, Brian Wilson, who was a Vietnam vet and had discovered in Vietnam what war was really about, came back and he said, David, we've got to do something much more than just contacting our Congress people. And we decided to go out to Concord Naval Weapons Station and attempt to block every truck and or train that was taking munitions out to be shipped or loaded on ships to go to Vietnam or to go to El Salvador and to support the Contras in Nicaragua. And this was our first protest in June of whatever that was, 82. No, 87, excuse me. And Brian next had decided, so all summer we were, every day we'd be out there in the scorching hot sun trying to block these arms shipments. Brian decided that starting September 1st, he and other veterans were going to fast for 30 days and block every train that left with munitions to load onto ships next. And lo and behold, Brian had sent a letter to the commander, and we'd gone over to talk with the person at the front desk. We just had a prayer service and a press conference on the tracks saying what they were going to do. And that day, instead of stopping the train, they just ran over us. And Brian had both legs cut off and a massive hole in his head and blood everywhere. And it was the worst day of my life. I'm trying to, this is Brian on the tracks, and I'm trying to hold the blood in his head. We were sure he was going to die. And obviously what our government was saying was, we have a war to fight and you guys get out of the way. Well, and Brian lived, as probably most of you know, and actually is living in Nicaragua now. He couldn't stand living in this country any longer. But we continued blocking every train for the next 2.5 years. People were living on these tracks to make sure they didn't come through at night. And sometimes we would get up to a month in jail. They broke my arm for refusing to get off the tracks when there was a train. After this experience with Brian, they would stop the trains about 100 yards from us, and sheriff's deputies would round up everybody that was on the tracks and take them off to jail. But as I said, I think this is the last one I'm going to show, so we'll have more time for discussion. But part of what I learned from this is sometimes we have to go beyond what is considered normal in our struggle to stop the madness of war and nuclear bombs, and sustained struggle are so critical. I mean, one demonstration once a month or once every 2 months or something, it's not going to do it. But at any rate, again, I'm so grateful to all of you for what you're doing with World Beyond War. And you can ask me if you'd like, but my wife and I have been war tax resistors ever since the Vietnam War. The idea when over half of each one of our federal tax dollars goes for wars and preparations for wars. And while they're cutting budgets for everything that's going to help people. And we just came to feel, we can't work for peace and pray for peace, but pay for war. And so I can share some of what that experience would be like if you'd like to hear more. But and sometimes they lose it in their computer. Because I mean, we write a letter, we fill out the 1040 tax form honestly, but then we deduct 53% or 54% or whatever it is from what we owe, and give that to the People's Life Fund, which distributes the interest of what all people. It's in the San Francisco Bay Area, but every year they give the interest of all that money that's been given. And this last year, I think, was over $70,000 to community groups working for peace and justice. And then the agreement is that if the IRS ever comes after you for that money, then they give it back to you, so you don't have to pay it double. But anyway, it's and we send a letter each year together also with our IRS forms expressing, wow, this is insane. Killing innocent men, women, and children in one country after another, and threatening the lives of all of us all over the world. So next, or let's not next. It looks like there's some questions. Bob.
Oh, yes. Thanks for taking my question. I appreciate your comments here. I'm thinking back when you were starting, there was a powerful peace movement, and then especially in the Vietnam era.
Mm-hmm.
So then it kind of petered out or something. Do you think we have made progress with convincing people that the institution of war must be abolished? Or is it about the same as it was 60 years ago?
Well, the Vietnam War from 1955, 56, when it really started for the United States, it had been, it was China for 8 years before that. The American peace movement was dead as far as Vietnam was concerned. It was hardly on the radar. I was a lobbyist for 5 years with the Friends Committee on National Legislation, trying to get Congress to to use their pressure to cut off the funds for the war. Well, you probably know, but the Gulf of Tonkin resolution that gave permission. I mean, this, it's based. Most wars, as you know, are based on lies, but the lie there was the North Vietnamese had fired on our ships, our warships that were off their coast. And therefore we started bombing. We had to start bombing Hanoi, or had bombing North Vietnam. And well, my point is, until thousands of American soldiers began coming home, and night after night on television, seeing, as you remember, the little girl who had been napalmed running down the street. And yeah, it took, or did I say, only 2 members of Congress voted against that, Wayne Morse and Ernst Greening. But, you know, finally, after the campuses woke up, after the peace movement woke up, after ordinary people woke up, until there were millions of people all across this country, the Vietnam moratorium in the fall of 1969, it was almost every city and town in this country had demonstrations. Every university had demonstrations. Well, I think there was a lot of work that happened to help that come about, from kind of being asleep at the wheel, so to speak, to saying, this is being done in our name. These are innocent civilians that are getting killed, and American soldiers. And so it's a long-term struggle. I mean, that was what, 1957 to 60, say 67, 68, to really get that movement so strong that the American government had to begin to listen to us. And by the end, after the American people woke up, Congress did cut off the funds for the war. And so that ended the war. Well, I mean, I am totally against the draft. I mean, they teach people to hate, to kill, to enemy, to feel the other countries are less than human, and we're of course all important, and all this stuff. But the fact that ordinary Americans were coming home in body bags, almost every family knew somebody that had been killed. And but anyway, I do not want to, going back to having a draft. And that also gives a blank check that any president that decides he wants to go to war, he can mobilize as many people as he wants, as many soldiers at a moment's notice, because he's got all their names and contact information and everything else. So it's a tool, it's a powerful tool of war. But I think in the 60s, the civil rights movement, what King had done and what the students had done, what the freedom riders did, what the voting rights campaign did, it awoke a lot of people to people's movements can make change. We can make a difference. And so it gave people hope. And you can challenge the powers that be. I mean, I think a lot of us grew up, you know, in those days thinking, well, America is this epitome of good and peace and justice. Well, that whole thing got destroyed, you know, by that movement, or translated into hope that things can change. And so that was a precursor. And David Harris and a lot of the people who were key in that Vietnam War movement went south and were in Mississippi, and you know, had threats against their lives. So that was the incubator. So anyway, I think there was not organizations like World Beyond War, and that, you know, and the kind of work that World Beyond War is doing. We have people in 192 countries who are aware of each other and relating to each other and involved in in campaigns together, and people defunding, working to defund the major military companies. I mean, things are better and worse, and but because in some ways they're worse, there's no reason to give up hope. I mean, if not us, whom? Who's going to try to save us from going over the brink? Sudarshan, unmute yourself. Unmute.
How is that now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for showing all those screens. I had seen them before, but this time I learned a little bit more deeply about all your adventures. The question that I have actually is about the war that is going on between Ukraine and Russia. It's going on, though we are not directly involved, we are indirectly involved. We are shipping ammunitions and all those kinds of things. How would you describe the peace movement at present in view of the conflict that is going on, the war that is going on in Ukraine? Would you have any comments or advice about
Well, that could take the next hour. But I would encourage if you haven't already seen it, read Medea Benjamin's book, Making Sense of a Senseless War. And I've known Medea for the last 30 years or so. And they do an excellent job really trying to give the larger picture. And of course, it was a crime, and it was horrendous that Russia invaded Ukraine. That's no way. And we, of course, did the same thing in Iraq and Afghanistan and so many other places, and are funding Israel to do that to Israel. I mean, to Gaza. But this was a horrendous crime. But we say it was unprovoked, and that is not true. I mean, we had been involved in the coup d'etat of 2014 against the president and brought in a pro-Western president, and then had been arming from 2014 till now, or until this last year. We're arming Ukraine, preparing for war, and supporting under this new government the Nazi elements within Ukraine. We're on the front lines of fighting the people in Donbass and eastern Ukraine. I think, I forget how many thousands of people were killed during those years. And at any rate, and Ukraine, I mean, the United States had invited Ukraine to join NATO. I guess under which, I forget which president, said, yes, of course you'd be welcome to join NATO. And also the NATO, we had promised, I mean, I think most of you know all this, but the US had promised, the US and all of Western Europe had promised Gorbachev, NATO would not move 1 inch to the east. And that was 1 inch to the east of West Germany. And that was it was our part of the bargain, where the Soviet Union said, yes, okay, Germany can reunify. And of course, Gorbachev had a vision of a common European home, where we could all live together in a peaceful way. Well, by 2022, NATO was right on Russia's borders. And Ukraine is another 1,300 miles or so on Russia's borders. And so they'd be surrounded. And for those of us that were around during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the Soviets put, missiles in Cuba, we had a fit. I mean, we were ready to bring the world to a nuclear war if they did not withdraw those missiles, because they were 90 miles from our shore. Well, I think that's the way the Russians felt about what NATO and the US and were doing to them. And that was endangering their security. And as people said to me over and over and over again when I was in Russia in the 60s, and then I went back 3 times in the 90s after my 26 years of banishment was over, said, the Soviet Union lost over 27 million people in the last war. And we can't allow that to happen again. And we were not prepared. So, and that does not to me justifying, killing innocent people, bombing their homes and hospitals, et cetera, is not acceptable, no matter who's doing it. But the only way to end any war is through negotiation. And Russia and Ukraine there was a proposal for a negotiated end of the war when it was last March. And what's his name? Who was then the prime minister of Britain went to talk with Zelensky and says, don't do it. The West is behind you. And then Austin, our Secretary of War, went to Kiev and promised we need to weaken Russia. And then Biden went to Poland and said Putin has to go. So I believe that the Russians felt similar to the way Americans do, but that does not justify it. If the United States had started a nuclear war because the Russians had done something horrible, that wouldn't be justified. It was provoked. But read Mardia's book if you haven't.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
Just a quick comment from me. Our chapter's book club will be starting a discussion of Medea's book
Wonderful.
next month. So the first Thursday of February. You're all welcome to join us.
Good.
Any other questions? Oh, Susie Garrett. Susie.
Susie.
Thank you so much for sharing all your stories. Wow. I feel like there's some kind of special serendipity you have with yourself throughout your life to have this all go that way. And I know it's not been easy, but it's happening. And it's really amazing. I wonder if you could share your thoughts on what the status of Yemen is these days with the wars in Yemen.
I'm not an expert on Yemen, but we have spent $1.2 trillion since President Bush declared a war on terror. 1.2 trillion in the Middle East wars. And that has included, I don't know how many billions of horrendous weapons to
Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia, which they've been using on Yemen. And so that war has been funded and armed by the United States. And you may know more than I do how many years that war has dragged on, but it's the innocent people in Yemen and in every country are, the people that suffer. And there was a webinar, I don't know if any of you, yesterday with Kathy Kelly, on war crimes tribunals. And it's really very exciting. And I think it's November, they're going to have a war crimes tribunal against every nation that has been committing war crimes with face-to-face testimony, including people. Kathy had photographs and stories from Yemen. So the US has been totally complicit in that war, as we are in Gaza, for the bombing attacks of Gaza and maintaining the blockade, et cetera, for the last, whatever it is, 10 years or so, where they're living in a prison. And anyway, to me, and we have actually, with Saudi Arabia, we have actually supplied the planes that have been dropping bombs. We have actually, I think, been fueling these planes so they don't even have to go back home, so they can just keep dropping bombs. But then to say, well, it's not our responsibility, this is Saudi Arabia, fighting this war. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, the tribunal account, it's going to happen in November, like you say, is also going to call upon companies that supply these things to the war, because the United Nations statement says that that's totally against their rules too. So Raytheon and Boeing and all those guys will be the red carpet too. So that should be really powerful.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, and people know these laws of war were drawn up after the Second World War, the Nuremberg trials, defining what is a crime of war, and a crime against humanity, a crime against peace. And we wrote those rules, but unfortunately, so far, it's only been used against nations that lose wars, but not against the nations that win the wars. So it's very exciting that Kathy and others are organizing this, and I'd encourage people to get involved. John, unmute, please.
Yes, thank you. David, you were the co-founder of the Nonviolent Peace Force some years ago. I understand that it's still going strong. Are there some recent activities where they're trying to intervene in some of the conflicts today?
Yes. There are, in South Sudan, I think we have over 100 people that are protecting people in refugee camps. It's been dangerous for women to even go out to get wood to try to cook for their families. So they're accompanying the women, et cetera. There are people in the Philippines. There are nonviolent peace force people in the Philippines, and my mind is not working as well as it used to. I said Sudan, but in Asia. Anyway, but their budget is now $27 million largely, or I don't know whether largely, but including UN agencies and including some what we call friendly European countries, governments, I meant. And the world is beginning to see that there are, and especially at the UN, that there are other ways to protect people other than bombing one side or the other. And that unarmed civilians, if they go into the area where people are endangered because of wars or conflict, can actually, it shows that the world is watching. And our hope is that longer term, the governments and the people of the world will see there is alternative ways to find security and protection for people other than sending in the Marines or killing folks. Thank you.
David, we want to thank
and
you.
Related to that, I just wanted to say, and some of you may already know about this, but John Ruhr and others, and it's inspired by the Nonviolent Peace Force. He was just in Ukraine, and what worried him most was the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which has been, in the middle of that war. And if that thing, including I think it's 31 years or so of nuclear waste, and 6 nuclear power plants with the hot cores, if that gets, accidentally bombed or whatever, I mean, millions of people all over Europe are going to die. And so, and this is under the auspices of World Beyond War. We now have over 40 people that would be ready to go if there's agreement. If we can get the agreement from both Ukraine and Russia, that there's, because the International Atomic Energy staff who are there, a few of them are on the at the plant, are calling for protection, and neither side is going to allow armed protection. They say, oh, they're allied with the other side, but if they're unarmed and nonviolent, hopefully there's a chance. But anyway, it's on the World Beyond War website. I'd encourage you to look at them. And if you know any people, and I think there's people up to 80 years old, it's 40, and people are already getting nonviolent training. And if that should be allowed to happen, it's going to be an important, it will get world attention. And it's like the congressman joining or reading the names of the war dead on the Capitol steps. That's what caught the media attention. And Ukraine obviously has the media attention. And for a group that nonviolently protect the people of all of Europe is a very newsworthy story. So I'm really glad that World Beyond War is sponsoring this.
So David, thank you very much. We're coming up to the end of our evening together. Do you want to make a final statement?
Yeah, I would just like to, I actually would like to hear more what you're doing in California, and including the billboards, et cetera. But I think this business of threatening nuclear war, and we are threatening nuclear war with both Russia and China, accidentally or on purpose. And we are sending our aircraft carriers and fighter jets and everything to in the South China Sea off of Tibet, the military bases surrounding China, and in Ukraine, almost every day, we're sending more offensive weapons and training the people that are actually bombing in Russia, et cetera. At some point, Russia is going to say no more. And maybe they use a small, quote, small Hiroshima-sized tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine. And then, you know, it can escalate so easily and so fast that, you know, billions of us will end up dying. Well, somehow we have to wake up people that this is not this is not the way to get security. It's the exact opposite. And the time to get active and speak out and demonstrate and sit in your congressman's office, et cetera, is now. After the bombs start flying, it's going to be a little late. And so I think that might be a very important handle, not only for saving the world, but for touching people's hearts. You know, do I really want to risk my children and my grandchildren's lives? And then I just wanted to say a word, additional word about war tax resistance. If you're interested in war tax resistance, there's something called War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee, a National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee. And they have a great website with all kinds of graphs of where the money is really going, of how to do war tax resistance. If your money is withheld from your salary, how you can legally change that, you know, and about the groups like the People's Life Fund. You can find that on the where people like us are putting the money that we're using the war. And I would encourage everybody, whether your conscience is calling you to resist 50 or 53% of the taxes, but to consider at least resisting $10.40, the 1040 form, and send a letter along with your IRS form saying this is insane. I just cannot pay this stuff, or make it $104, you know, a multiple of 1040. And probably that's going to be so small it won't even they won't do anything. But you know, if millions of people start doing that, you know, it might, you know, pick up some media attention and, you know, of the government. And actually, John Lewis, who we all know through his civil rights work, every year for the last 20 years of his life, introduced I forget what it was called, a bill.
The Peace Tax Fund bill.
Peace Tax Fund, where you could, which was lobbying that there could be conscience objection to paying war taxes. You know, which is a natural thing to do. I mean, why should you force people to be involved in killing other people if their conscience says I can't do that? But and I'm not sure who's going to take the lead, but there is a group called, what is the name of the group, Bertha?
The Peace Tax Fund. Yeah, comes under that.
Peace Tax Fund, and that's actually on the War Tax Resistance Coordinating.
Yeah, exactly. It's on that too. You know, it has been introduced again this year. Yeah, I can't remember the name, the congressman.
But anyway, you know, there's a saying that I think Dick Gregory said at one point, or actually it was a member of the Nixon administration where there was 500,000 people marching in front of the White House. And he said, let the people march all they want to, as long as they pay their taxes. You know? And I think that's true. I mean, you know, and the Congress people, many of them were bought off by the, you know, the people making all these, the corporations making all this billions, trillions of dollars from making the aircraft carriers and all the rest of it. But anyway, I would encourage everybody to search your own conscience about how we can withdraw our support from these wars, which are ongoing. And hopefully, at least some of us will live long enough that we'll see the abolition of all wars. And I think there's, in some ways, more hope for that now than there's ever been, with people in 192 countries working for that. And David Swanson is so amazing. He's got a new book called The Monroe Doctrine.
Yeah.
Which some of you have perhaps seen. But it's amazing all that he does. It's so inspiring. So thank you again for all you're doing. And I applaud you 100%. And I'll be more involved in the California campaign.
Thank you.
I can, as much as I can. Thank you.
So we have, David, for your interest, we have a book study the first Thursday of every month. And this coming book study for February, we'll be reading the Medea Benjamin book about Ukraine. And we're going to make it easy because we're just going to say the foreword and the introduction and then the first chapter only. And so we hope as many of you can come as possible, because the Ukraine war is like ridiculous and confusing. So anyway.
So I had just two other quick things.
Yes.
One is, I imagine everybody knows a global security system and alternative to war from World Beyond War. But I think it's really important that people see there's an alternative. You know, you don't have to spend $1 trillion a year on wars as a way to get security. I mean, I think it's a great book. And then there's something called Dismantling Racism and Militarism in U.S. Foreign Policy, put out by the Friends Committee on National Legislation. And it's one of the best things I've ever seen. And it's on their website free, or you can write to Friends Committee on National Legislation and get a hard copy. And then do most of you know the Peace and Planet News, put out by, it's a Veterans for Peace, but look up Peace and Planet News on the web. And this is also there. Also, this is the current issue. Somehow this madness must cease from Martin Luther King. But there's a lot of excellent articles, especially from veterans who have suffered and have seen the horrendous suffering in war. And if my book is now an audiobook, and I think Dari and Bob have it, and maybe they can share with everybody that the audio version, or my book is available.
Great. Yes, you did send us that. So if I've got the go ahead from you to share the audiobook, it's listenable through YouTube. Fabulous. Thank you.
So thanks again, and we really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing all of you at the book study, we hope. So thanks.
David Hartsough, thank you so much for being here tonight and for sharing so much with us.